The night found her before mercy ever could, a night so cold it felt alive, gnawing at her skin, stealing her breath in shallow, panic pulls, and when she finally collapsed into the snow she did not cry out because pain had already taught her that sound invited worse things, so she dragged herself forward in silence, palms torn raw, knees burning, body shaking not just from the freezing wind but from what had been done to her, from the betrayal of people she once trusted, from the certainty that if she stopped moving she would simply disappear into the white like she had never mattered at all, and yet something stubborn inside her refused to let that be the end, refused to let the world decide she was finished, and so she crawled, inch by inch, guided only by a dim light flickering between trees like a star that had fallen too low, a cabin light, a promise she didn't dare believe in, while memories clawed at her mind, memories of warmth, of laughter, of a life that had felt ordinary and safe before it was ripped away, before the storm of cruelty found her and stripped her not just of clothes but of dignity, safety, and certainty, and every movement felt like betrayal of her own exhaustion, her muscles screaming to stop, to sleep, to surrender, but surrender had never saved anyone, not her, not now, not ever, and when the cabin finally loomed before her, dark logs against the snow, she pressed her forehead to the frozen ground and allowed herself one silent plea. Not to be rescued, not to be pampered, but simply to be allowed to live, because living meant there was still a chance that the story did not end here, and when the door finally opened it was not a miracle that stepped out but a man carrying his own quiet scars, a man who had learned long ago that the world was not kind and that kindness had to be chosen anyway, and he looked down at her not with hunger, not with judgment, but with the stillness of someone who recognized pain because it mirrored his own, and in that moment nothing was spoken because words were too small, but he wrapped her in a blanket as if wrapping her back into the human race, lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all, and carried her across the threshold not like a burden but like a responsibility he was willing to accept, and inside the cabin the fire crackled, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, patiently, as if it had been waiting for her all along, and as warmth slowly returned to her limbs the shaking turned to quiet sobs she could no longer contain, not because she was weak but because she was finally safe enough to feel, and he did not tell her to be brave or strong or grateful, he simply stayed, placing a cup of warm broth in her trembling hands, keeping a respectful distance that spoke louder than any vow, and while she slept by the fire that night, wrapped in clean clothes that did not belong to her but carried no threat, something shifted in the universe, something small but powerful, the kind of shift that turns endings into beginnings, and if you're listening to this story and you feel like you're crawling through your own cold night right now, hold on, because this is only chapter 1, and stories like this unfold because someone refuses to give up and someone else chooses to care. And if you want to know how survival turns into strength and how broken beginnings become queen, morning did not arrive all at once but crept in quietly, a pale gray light slipping through the small cabin window as if afraid to disturb what had survived the night, and when she opened her eyes she did so slowly, not because her body was weak anymore but because her mind had learned that waking often meant danger, yet this time there was only the steady crackle of dying embers, the scent of wood smoke, and a warmth that did not vanish when she moved, and for a long moment she simply lay there breathing, testing reality, realizing with cautious disbelief that she was still alive, that her fingers were pink instead of blue, that pain no longer screamed but whispered, and when she finally sat up she noticed how carefully the men had prepared the space, extra blankets folded nearby, a pot of water warming, clean clothes laid out without explanation, and it struck her then that survival was not just about escaping death but about being treated as someone worth effort, worth time, worth dignity, and when he returned he did not ask her questions or demand her story because he understood that stories bloom when they are ready, not when they are forced, and days passed like that, quiet and unhurried, marked by simple rituals of healing, meals shared without pressure, firewood chopped, silence respected, and with each sunrise she felt herself returning, not to who she had been before the world broke her, but to someone new, someone tempered, someone stronger in ways she was only beginning to understand, and the bruises faded, and the nightmares loosened their grip, and she learned the rhythm of the land around the cabin, the way snow could be beautiful without being merciless, the way stillness could mean peace instead of threat, and the men watched this transformation with the same quiet care he had shown from the beginning, never claiming ownership, never positioning himself as a savior, only as a witness to her strength. And one evening as she stood by the window wrapped in a heavy coat he had mended himself, she realized that she was standing tall again, not crawling, not hiding, not begging, and something inside her settled into place, a certainty that what she had endured would not define her end but had already shaped her crown, and when she finally spoke her story it came out not as a confession but as a testament, and he listened as if it were sacred, as if survival itself were holy. And in time the cabin no longer felt like a refuge but like a foundation, a place where she rebuilt herself piece by piece, choosing who she would become, choosing to live not as a victim of cruelty but as proof that cruelty fails. And when spring arrived and the snow began to melt, she stepped outside into the sun with her head high, not because life had been gentle but because she had become unbreakable. And if you've stayed with this story to the end, remember this feeling, remember that queens are not born in comfort but forged in cold nights and impossible choices. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own hidden strength, subscribe to this channel, because more stories like this are waiting, stories that don't just entertain but remind you who you are and what you can survive.